The storm didn't just knock, it clawed at the ancient stones of the fortress, a furious beast of wind and ice. Inside, Elia stood sentinel, not over a kingdom of riches or a throne of power, but over something far more precious and far more besieged, the final ember of his own unconquerable soul. He held a letter in his hand, its edges worn, the ink blurred by a single, defiant tear he'd shed years ago. It was a promise, a vow made to a ghost, and tonight the ghosts of his past were marching with the storm. They whispered his failures on the wind, hissed his regrets through the cracks in the stone. Every gust was a memory of a time he had bent, a time he had almost broken. The fortress was his mind, its walls the discipline he had forged in the fires of 1,000 silent battles. But this storm, this was different. It carried the scent of her perfume, the echo of her laughter, the crushing weight of her absence. It was the final siege, the one he had always known was coming. The letter contained his final vow, the one that would determine if the fortress would stand or crumble into dust, taking him with it. He could feel the foundations trembling, not from the wind but from the war within. This wasn't a battle against an external foe. It was a confrontation with every demon he had ever caged, and they were rattling the bars, hungry for his surrender. He had guarded this inner sanctum for so long, but the sentinel was weary, and the night was just beginning. The true test wasn't whether the walls would hold against the storm, but whether he could hold against himself. This was the vow he had to keep, not just for her, but for the man he had sworn to become in her memory. The fortress of an unconquerable soul, a grand title for a structure built on the fault line of a broken heart. He looked out through a narrow slit in the stone, the world a maelstrom of white and gray. He was alone, but he was not undefended. He had his pain, his discipline, and his vow, and in the heart of the storm he prepared to make his final stand. The world outside had long since faded to a muted suggestion, a whisper of a life he once knew. Here, in the cold, unyielding embrace of his self-imposed exile, the only reality was the rhythmic crash of his own heart against the cage of his ribs and the relentless assault of memory. Each memory was a battering ram, seeking a weakness in the walls he had so painstakingly constructed. He had learned long ago that the most dangerous enemies are not the ones who march with banners and drums, but the ones who wear familiar faces and speak with familiar voices in the quiet corridors of the mind. They were the ghosts of past selves, the specters of regret, the phantoms of what might have been. They were the architects of his downfall, the very forces he had sworn to conquer. He remembered a boy, not yet a man, standing on a sun-drenched precipice, the world a canvas of infinite possibility at his feet. The boy had a heart full of fire and a soul unburdened by the weight of compromise. He dreamed of changing the world, of leaving a mark on the tapestry of time, of building a legacy that would echo through the ages. He was a vessel of pure, unadulterated potential, a symphony of untamed ambition. Where had that boy gone? Had he been lost in the labyrinth of 1,000 small surrenders? Had his fire been extinguished by the relentless drip of mediocrity? The ghost of that boy was the most formidable of his assailants, for he wielded the sharpest weapon of all, the unbearable agony of what could have been. He traced the faded script on the letter, the words a testament to a love that had been both his salvation and his undoing. Her name was a prayer on his lips, a wound in his soul. She had seen the fortress in him before he even knew it existed. She had believed in his strength when all he could see was his own weakness. She had been the keeper of his flame, the guardian of his better angels, and he had failed her. The storm outside was a pale imitation of the tempest that raged within him at the thought of his failure. It was a failure not of intention but of courage. He had allowed the world to dim his light, to chip away at the foundations of his conviction. He had traded his birthright of greatness for the fleeting comfort of conformity. He had chosen the well-trodden path of least resistance, and in doing so, he had lost not only himself, but her as well. The vow he had made, the vow he now guarded with the last vestiges of his strength, was a promise to reclaim that which had been lost. It was a declaration of war against the forces of entropy that sought to pull him back into the abyss of his own making. It was a commitment to forge a soul so resilient, so unyielding, that it could withstand the combined onslaught of all the sorrows and regrets that life could muster. He was not just guarding a fortress. He was building it, stone by painful stone, in the crucible of his own suffering. The first principle of this construction, the bedrock upon which all else was built, was the absolute refusal to be a victim. He had spent years languishing in the prison of his own narrative, a story of a man wronged by fate, betrayed by circumstance, and crippled by the actions of others. It was a seductive lie, a comforting balm for a wounded ego, but it was a lie nonetheless. The truth, he had come to understand, was that he was the sole architect of his own reality. Every choice, every action, every thought had been a brick in the edifice of his life. He had built his own prison, and he alone held the key to his liberation. He remembered the day the shift began, the moment the prisoner resolved to become the warden. He had been staring at his own reflection in a rain-streaked window, a hollow-eyed stranger staring back at him. He saw not a man but a collection of excuses, a monument to self-pity. And in that moment a spark of defiance, long dormant, flickered to life. It was a quiet rebellion, an internal coup d'etat. He would no longer be a passive observer in the unfolding drama of his own life. He would seize the pen and write his own story. This was the first lesson, the foundational truth that every aspiring sentinel must embrace. You are the sovereign of your own soul. The external world is a chaotic and unpredictable maelstrom, but the internal world, the fortress of your mind, is yours to command. You can choose to be a ship tossed about on the waves of circumstance, or you can choose to be the captain, charting a course through the storm. The choice is yours and yours alone. He began by reclaiming his mornings. The pre-dawn hours, once a time of restless tossing and anxious dread, became his sanctuary, his training ground. While the world slept, he would rise, his body protesting, his mind screaming for the false comfort of the familiar. But he would force himself to his feet, a small act of defiance that sent a ripple of change through the very fabric of his being. He would sit in silence, the darkness a canvas upon which he would paint his intentions for the day. He would not allow the day to happen to him, he would happen to the day. He would visualize the man he wanted to be, the fortress he was determined to build. He would see himself standing firm against the onslaught of distraction, temptation, and self-doubt. He would feel the unshakable confidence, the unwavering resolve, the inner peace that was his birthright. This was not a passive exercise in wishful thinking. It was an act of deliberate creation, of conscious programming. He was rewiring the neural pathways of his brain, replacing the well-worn grooves of negativity and self-pity with new channels of strength and resilience. He was, in essence, becoming the architect of his own mind. He then turned his attention to his body, the physical vessel of his soul. He had neglected it for years, treating it as a mere afterthought, a repository for the poisons of a life lived without intention. He began to move, to push his physical limits, to forge a connection between mind and muscle. The pain was excruciating at first, a fiery protest from a body long accustomed to stagnation. But with each drop of sweat, with each searing ache, he felt a sense of purification, of renewal. He was not just building muscle, he was building discipline. He was teaching his body to obey the commands of his will, to transcend the perceived limitations of his comfort zone. The gym became his forge, the weights his hammer and anvil, and with each repetition, he was shaping not just his physique, but his character. The world outside the fortress continued its relentless assault. The demands of a soulless job, the shallow pronouncements of a superficial culture, the siren song of instant gratification, they all sought to breach his defenses, to pull him back into the morass of mediocrity he had fought so hard to escape. But now, he was armed with a newfound clarity of purpose. He began to see these external pressures not as threats, but as opportunities to test his resolve, to sharpen his blade. He learned to say no. It was a simple word, but it held a universe of power. He said no to the meaningless social obligations that drained his energy and left him feeling empty. He said no to the endless stream of digital distractions that fractured his attention and kept him from the deep work that was essential to his growth. He said no to the insidious whispers of his own inner critic, the voice that told him he was not good enough, that he was destined to fail. With each no he uttered to the world, he was saying yes to himself. He was carving out a sacred space for his own evolution, a space where he could cultivate his strengths, confront his weaknesses, and build the life he was truly meant to live. The solitude was a double-edged sword. In the quiet emptiness of his self-imposed exile, his demons had nowhere to hide. They swirled around him, their voices amplified in the silence. They replayed his past failures on an endless loop, taunting him with the specter of his own inadequacy. There were nights when the fortress seemed on the verge of collapse, when the weight of his regrets threatened to crush him. He would lie awake, his heart a leaden drum in his chest, the darkness a suffocating shroud. He would feel the familiar tendrils of despair creeping in, the seductive whisper of surrender. But in those moments of profound darkness, he would cling to the memory of her, to the vow he had made. Her face would appear in his mind's eye, her voice a beacon in the storm. She had seen the king in him, even when he was playing the jester. She had believed in his potential, even when he was mired in self-doubt. To surrender now would be to betray not only himself, but her memory as well, and that was a price he was unwilling to pay. He learned to transmute his pain into fuel. The agony of his loss, the shame of his past mistakes, he would channel it all into his training, into his work, into the relentless pursuit of his own self-mastery. His pain became his power, his scars a testament to his resilience. He understood that the strongest fortresses are not the ones that have never been attacked, but the ones that have been besieged, breached, and rebuilt, stronger than before. The cracks in the stone were not signs of weakness, but symbols of a strength that had been tested and proven. He began to study the great minds of history, the Stoic philosophers, the warrior poets, the titans of industry who had faced their own storms and emerged victorious. He devoured their words, searching for the timeless principles that had guided them through the crucible of their own lives. He learned about the dichotomy of control, the idea that we should focus our energy only on that which is within our power to influence, our thoughts, our actions, our responses. The external world, with all its chaos and uncertainty, was beyond our control. To fret over it was to squander our most precious resource, our attention. He learned about amor fati, the love of fate, the practice of not just accepting our circumstances, but embracing them as necessary for our growth. Every obstacle, every setback, every loss was an opportunity to practice virtue, to cultivate resilience, to become the person we were meant to be. He learned about memento mori, the remembrance of death, the sobering realization that our time on this earth is finite. This was not a morbid obsession, but a powerful motivator, a call to live each day with intention, to not squander a single moment on trivialities. These were not just abstract philosophical concepts to him. They were tools, weapons in his arsenal against the forces of darkness that sought to consume him. He applied them with the ruthless efficiency of a seasoned warrior. When a wave of anxiety would wash over him, he would remind himself of the dichotomy of control, focusing on his breath, on the present moment, on the only thing he could truly command, his own mind. When a setback threatened to derail his progress, he would practice amor fati, searching for the lesson, the opportunity for growth hidden within the adversity. When the siren song of procrastination would tempt him, he would remember memento mori, the ticking clock, a stark reminder of his own mortality. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the fortress began to solidify. The frantic, chaotic energy of his mind began to calm, replaced by a quiet confidence, an unshakable resolve. He was no longer a victim of his own thoughts but their master. He could observe them without judgment, allowing them to pass like clouds in the sky without being swept away by their emotional charge. He had found his center, his inner citadel, a place of profound stillness and unyielding strength that no external storm could touch. The world outside began to notice the change. His colleagues at his soulless job saw a new focus in his eyes, a new purpose in his stride. The shallow acquaintances who had once pitied him now looked at him with a mixture of confusion and admiration. They saw the physical transformation, the hardened physique, the disciplined demeanor. But they could not see the true transformation, the one that had taken place in the silent chambers of his own soul. They could not see the fortress he had built, the sentinel who stood guard. He no longer sought their approval, their validation. He had found a deeper source of fulfillment, a sense of self-worth that was not contingent on the fleeting opinions of others. He was playing a different game now, an infinite game, the game of becoming the best version of himself. And in that game, the only competitor was the man he had been yesterday. The letter, his final vow, remained his constant companion, a tangible reminder of the promise he had made. He no longer saw it as a symbol of his failure, but as a testament to his resilience. It was a reminder that even in the depths of despair, a single spark of defiance can ignite a revolution. It was a reminder that the most profound transformations are often born from the ashes of our greatest losses. It was a reminder that the love he had lost was not gone, but had been transmuted into a source of strength, a guiding star in the darkness. He knew the storm was not over. There would be other tempests, other sieges. Life, in its infinite wisdom, would continue to test him, to challenge him, to push him to his limits. But now he was ready. He stood sentinel, not with a sense of dread, but with a quiet sense of anticipation. Let the winds howl, let the rains fall, let the ghosts of the past march on his gates. The fortress would stand. The sentinel would not falter. For he was guarding not just a collection of stones, but the sacred ground of an unconquerable soul. And he knew, with a certainty that transcended all doubt, that he would not break his final vow. The silence that followed the storm was more profound than any noise. It was a silence that held the echo of 1,000 shattered memories and the promise of a dawn yet to break. Elias stood amidst the quiet aftermath, the fortress of his mind still, its foundations unshaken. The ghosts had retreated, not vanquished, but held at bay by the sheer force of his will. The letter, his vow, rested on a simple stone table, its purpose served, its promise kept. But this was not an end. It was a beginning. The sentinel's duty was not a single heroic act, but a continuous, unyielding practice. The fortress was not a static structure, but a living entity, requiring constant reinforcement, constant vigilance. The journey from the ruins of a broken man to the architect of an unconquerable soul was not a linear path. It was a spiral, a series of returns to the same fundamental truths, each time with a deeper understanding, a more profound integration. The principles he had embraced in the heart of his personal storm were not mere intellectual concepts. They were the very sinew of his being, the marrow in his bones. He had learned that the human spirit is not a fragile thing, easily broken. It is a blade that is forged in fire, tempered in adversity. The scars we carry are not signs of weakness, but symbols of our resilience, testaments to the battles we have fought and survived. The true measure of a man is not how he fares in the calm, but how he navigates the storm. It is in the crucible of our suffering that our true character is revealed. He had come to understand that the pursuit of comfort is the most insidious of traps. It is a siren song that lulls us into a state of complacency, of stagnation. The path to growth, to self-mastery, is a path of discomfort, of continuous challenge. We must actively seek out that which tests us, that which pushes us beyond our perceived limits. For it is in the space between what we are and what we are capable of becoming that our true potential lies. He had discovered the power of solitude, not as a state of loneliness, but as a sanctuary for self-reflection and renewal. In a world that bombards us with constant noise and distraction, the ability to be alone with our own thoughts is a superpower. It is in the silence that we can hear the whisper of our own intuition, the voice of our higher self. It is in the silence that we can confront our demons, not as enemies to be vanquished, but as teachers in disguise, revealing to us the unhealed wounds that hold us captive. He had mastered the art of transmutation, the alchemical process of turning lead into gold, pain into power. He no longer ran from his suffering but embraced it, using it as fuel for his transformation. He understood that every emotion, no matter how dark or uncomfortable, carries a message. To suppress our emotions is to deny ourselves the wisdom they have to offer. To feel them fully, to understand their root cause, is to unlock their transformative potential. He had cultivated a deep and abiding sense of gratitude, not for the things he had, but for the man he was becoming. He was grateful for the challenges that had forged his strength, for the losses that had taught him the value of what truly matters, for the moments of despair that had shown him the resilience of his own spirit. Gratitude was not a passive emotion, but an active practice, a lens through which he chose to view the world. It was a choice to focus on the beauty amidst the chaos, the light amidst the darkness. He had learned that the ultimate freedom is the freedom from the opinions of others. To build your sense of self-worth on the shifting sands of external validation is to build a house on a foundation of quicksand. The only approval that truly matters is your own. To know your own value, to stand in your own truth, regardless of the praise or criticism of the world, is to be truly free. He had embraced the mantle of leadership, not as a position of power over others, but as a commitment to leading himself to his own highest potential. He understood that the greatest act of service he could offer the world was to become the best version of himself. For in doing so, he would inspire others to do the same. We are all lighthouses, and our only duty is to shine our light as brightly as we can. He had come to see life not as a series of random events, but as a grand, unfolding narrative, a hero's journey. And he was the hero of his own story. He was not a passive character at the mercy of the plot. He was the author, the director, the protagonist. He had the power to write his own ending. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the narrow window of the fortress, Elias picked up the letter, his final vow. He did not tear it up, for it was a part of his story. He did not lock it away, for its memory was a source of strength. He simply folded it and placed it in the pocket of his worn coat. It was time to leave the fortress, not to abandon it, but to carry it with him into the world. The Sentinel's final vow was not an oath of eternal solitude, but a promise of engaged resilience. The fortress was not a refuge from the world, but a training ground for it. The true test of his strength would not be in the silent chambers of his own mind, but in the chaotic, unpredictable arena of life. He walked out into the crisp morning air, the world washed clean by the storm. He did not know what the future held. There would be new challenges, new heartbreaks, new opportunities for both triumph and failure. But he walked with a new sense of purpose, a new sense of peace. He was a sentinel, a guardian not of stone and mortar, but of an inner fire and unquenchable spirit. And he would carry that fire into the world, a beacon for those who still wandered in the darkness, a testament to the enduring power of the human will to not only survive, but to thrive. The journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, but he was ready. He was a warrior, a philosopher, a king in his own right. He was the master of his fate, the captain of his soul. And as he walked towards the rising sun, a single thought echoed in the fortress of his mind, a mantra for the road ahead: I am the storm. And what of you? What fortress are you guarding? What vow have you made to the ghost of your own potential? Are you a prisoner of your own narrative or the author of your own legend? The storm is coming. It is always coming. The question is not whether you will face it, but how. Will you crumble or will you stand? Will you be a victim or will you be the victor? The choice, as always, is yours. If this message resonates with you, if you feel the call of the Sentinel within your own soul, then join us. Subscribe to this channel and become part of a community of warriors, of architects of the unconquerable soul. Share your own stories of struggle and triumph in the comments below. For in sharing our stories, we strengthen not only ourselves but each other. The night is long and the storm is relentless, but together we are stronger than any tempest. Together we are unbreakable. Click the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in our journey. The world needs more sentinels. It needs you. Answer the call.